I gotta do this first. This is a song that I just recorded, and it's an old song called Unchained Melody. I had to play the piano, so it'll take just a second.
The last words Elvis Presley ever spoke were haunting in their simplicity and absolutely terrifying in their prophecy. At 9:30 a.m. on August 16, 1977, as the king of rock and roll slipped out of his bedroom at Graceland, his 20-year-old fiancée, Ginger Alden, called out a warning that would chill you to the bone. "Don't fall asleep in the bathroom," she pleaded. Elvis turned back and looked at her with those famous blue eyes and delivered what would become his final words, "I won't." But here's what's absolutely spine-chilling about this moment. Elvis had been having this exact same conversation for months. This wasn't just casual concern from a worried girlfriend. This was a death ritual that had been playing out night after night, and deep down, Elvis knew it. You see, Elvis had been battling chronic insomnia for years, and by 1977, it had become a full-blown nightmare. Every single night, he would take a cocktail of sedatives so powerful that they could knock out a horse, then stumble to the bathroom with a book, desperately trying to find some peace in those quiet, isolated moments. But Ginger's warning wasn't random. She had watched this dangerous pattern destroy the man she loved, night after night. The truth is, Elvis had been living in constant fear of falling asleep and never waking up. The bathroom had become his sanctuary, his final refuge where he could read, think, and maybe find some spiritual comfort before the drugs took hold. But it was also becoming his prison, a place where he was most vulnerable, most alone, and most likely to slip away forever. What makes this even more disturbing is that Elvis had been preparing for this moment for months. He'd been taking higher and higher doses of sedatives, desperately chasing sleep that wouldn't come naturally. His body was building tolerance, his mind was fracturing under the pressure, and every night became a game of pharmaceutical Russian roulette. And Ginger knew it. She'd been watching the man she was supposed to marry slowly disappear before her eyes. Every time he got up in the middle of the night, every time he headed to that bathroom with his pills and his book, she wondered if this would be the last time she'd see him alive. The most chilling part? Elvis's response wasn't defiant or dismissive. It was resigned. "I won't." Spoken like a man who knew he was making a promise he might not be able to keep. This wasn't the confident Elvis of the early days. This was a broken man, acknowledging his fiancée's fear while knowing he had no choice but to continue this deadly ritual. Think about it. How many times had they had this exact conversation? How many nights had Elvis promised he wouldn't fall asleep in the bathroom, only to wake up hours later slumped over, drugged beyond recognition? How many times had Ginger found him barely conscious, wondering if this was the night she'd become a widow before becoming a wife? The bathroom had become Elvis's confessional, his final sanctuary where he could face his demons alone. But it was also becoming his tomb. And somewhere in his drug-addled mind, he knew it. The man who had conquered the world with his voice, who had made millions scream his name, was now whispering his last words to a 20-year-old girl who was watching him die in slow motion. What's even more heartbreaking is that Elvis had been crying out for help in his own way. Every night, he'd take his cocktail of drugs and head to that bathroom, carrying a book about spirituality or death or meaning. He wasn't just trying to fall asleep, he was trying to make peace with whatever was coming. And that morning, August 16, 1977, something was different. Elvis had been awake all night, taking pills at 5 a.m., then more at 7 a.m., desperate for rest before a tour that would never happen. His body was screaming at him, his mind was fragmenting, and yet he still made that same dangerous journey to the bathroom. "I won't," he promised. But Elvis Presley knew, deep in his heart, that this promise was different. This time, he wouldn't wake up. But those weren't the only signs Elvis knew his time was running out. The book he chose to carry with him that final morning would reveal an obsession with death that had been consuming him for months. The book Elvis carried into that bathroom on his final morning wasn't some random bedside reading. It was a desperate man's final attempt to understand what happens when we die. A Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus by Frank Adams wasn't just spiritual curiosity. It was Elvis Presley's obsession with his own mortality reaching its terrifying peak. This book was all about the Shroud of Turin, that mysterious piece of fabric that supposedly covered Jesus Christ's face and body after his crucifixion. But here's what's absolutely chilling. Elvis wasn't reading this as a casual believer. He was a man staring death in the face, desperately searching for proof that there was something waiting for him on the other side. You have to understand, by 1977, Elvis had become consumed with death and the afterlife. This wasn't the young rebel who had shocked the world with his hip movements and revolutionary sound. This was a 42-year-old man who knew his body was failing, who felt his mind slipping away with every handful of pills, and who was terrified of what came next. The signs had been building for months. Elvis had been baptized twice during his lifetime, twice because he was so desperate to secure his place in heaven. But it gets even more disturbing. According to reports, he had been baptized once more after his death, as if somehow his family knew he was still searching for spiritual peace, even in the grave. But Elvis's spiritual crisis went far deeper than just Christianity. This was a man hedging his bets with eternity itself. He wore both a cross and a Star of David, honoring his Jewish ancestry through his mother's side. He practiced meditation, explored different faiths, and in his final months, he was even considering converting to Mormonism. Think about that for a second. A man who had everything the world could offer, who had been worshipped by millions, was so terrified of death that he was willing to abandon his lifelong faith and try something completely different. That's not spiritual exploration. That's spiritual panic. The most haunting part? Elvis had been studying the Shroud of Turin obsessively because he was looking for scientific proof of resurrection. He wasn't just hoping for life after death. He was desperately trying to find evidence that death could be conquered, that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to cheat what he knew was coming. But here's where it gets really dark. Modern science has proven that the Shroud of Turin is likely a medieval fake, dating somewhere between 1260 and 1390 AD, hundreds of years after Christ's death. Elvis was pinning his hopes for eternal life on what experts now know was probably an elaborate hoax. The man who had been fooled by so many people in his life was being fooled one last time, even in his final moments. Elvis's spiritual searching had become frantic, almost manic. He wasn't just reading religious books. He was devouring them, looking for answers that would calm his growing terror. Every night, he'd carry these books into that bathroom, hoping to find some peace, some assurance that when the drugs finally took him, he wouldn't just disappear into nothingness. His friends and family watched this spiritual obsession consume him. The man who had once been confident enough to challenge the entire music establishment was now so frightened of Judgment Day that he was practically begging every religion to accept him. Christian, Jewish, Mormon, it didn't matter. Elvis was collecting spiritual insurance policies like a man who knew the bill was coming due. And that final morning, as he clutched that book about Jesus' face, Elvis was still searching, still hoping, still terrified that maybe, despite all his spiritual preparation, he hadn't done enough to secure his place in whatever came next. The cruel irony is that Elvis spent his final conscious moments reading about resurrection while his own body was shutting down. He was studying the face of Jesus while his own face was about to be discovered, cold and lifeless on a bathroom floor. But Elvis wasn't just preparing his soul for what was coming. His body had been sending him warning signals for months, signals so obvious and so terrifying that even through his drug-induced haze, he couldn't ignore them anymore. While Elvis was desperately searching for spiritual salvation, his body was screaming at him with warnings so loud that even a cocktail of drugs couldn't silence them. By 1977, the king of rock and roll had become a walking medical emergency, and deep down, he knew it. Picture this. Elvis was consuming thousands of calories every single day, living off a diet that would kill a normal person in months. We're talking about burgers for breakfast, his infamous peanut butter, bacon, and banana sandwiches at all hours, and enough junk food to feed a small army. But this wasn't just overeating. This was a man using food to numb the same pain he was trying to drown with pills. His body had ballooned to the point where the famously handsome Elvis was barely recognizable. The man who had made millions of women swoon was now overweight, bloated, and struggling to breathe. But the weight gain was just the visible symptom of a much more terrifying internal breakdown. Elvis's blood pressure had skyrocketed to dangerous levels. His heart was working overtime just to keep his massive frame alive, pumping blood through a system that was clogged with drugs and deteriorating by the day. He'd already been hospitalized for intestinal blockages. His digestive system was literally shutting down from the combination of terrible diet and constant medication. But here's where it gets absolutely horrifying. Elvis knew all of this was happening, and he was so far gone that he couldn't hide it anymore. In the summer of 1977, just months before his death, Elvis did something that revealed just how disconnected from reality he had become. He called the White House and somehow managed to get President Jimmy Carter on the phone. What happened next was a conversation that would haunt Carter for years. The president later described Elvis as totally stoned and didn't know what he was saying. Carter said Elvis's sentences were almost incoherent and that he had to spend a long time on the phone trying to calm Elvis's paranoid delusions. Think about that for a moment. The king of rock and roll calling the most powerful man in the world, babbling incoherently about being shadowed by sinister forces and conspiracy theories about his friends being framed. This wasn't just drug use. This was a complete mental breakdown happening in real time, and it didn't stop there. Elvis kept calling the White House over and over in his final weeks, desperately trying to reach Carter again, but the president had heard enough. They wouldn't put him through anymore. Elvis had become such a liability that even the leader of the free world couldn't risk another conversation with him. The drugs that were supposed to help Elvis sleep had turned him into a paranoid, incoherent shell of his former self. Dr. George Nicopolis, known as Dr. Nick, had been feeding Elvis's addiction for years, providing him with an absolutely staggering 12,000 pills in just the 18 months before his death. 12,000 pills. That's more than 20 pills every single day for a year and a half. When Elvis's toxicology report came back after his death, it read like a pharmacist's nightmare. High doses of Dilaudid, Percodan, Demerol, Quaaludes, and codeine. They found traces of 10 separate drugs in his system, 10 different substances, all battling for control of what was left of Elvis's body and mind. But here's the most chilling part. Even Tennessee's chief medical examiner said that Elvis would have died anyway, drugs or no drugs. His body was so damaged, so completely destroyed by years of abuse, that death was inevitable. The pills didn't kill Elvis. They just chose the method and the timing. Dr. Nick later claimed that those 12,000 pills were meant to be shared among Elvis's entire entourage, but everyone knew the truth. They were going straight into Elvis's body, one handful at a time, night after night, as he sat in that bathroom trying to find peace that would never come. Elvis's body had become a ticking time bomb, and he knew it. Every labored breath, every chest pain, every moment of confusion was his body's way of screaming that time was running out. But Elvis wasn't just ignoring these warnings. In his final, desperate hours, he was making choices that revealed he knew death was coming. August 16, 1977 started like so many other nights for Elvis, with desperation, drugs, and the growing certainty that something terrible was about to happen. But this time, every single choice Elvis made revealed a man who knew he was living his final hours on Earth. At 5 a.m., Elvis and Ginger went to bed together, but sleep wouldn't come. Despite being exhausted from another sleepless night, despite having taken his usual cocktail of sedatives, Elvis's body refused to give him the rest he craved. He was supposed to fly to Maine that evening for a concert the next day, then continue on a nationwide tour. But somewhere in his drug-addled mind, Elvis knew he would never make that flight. By 7 a.m., Elvis was so desperate that he took another round of pills, a dangerous decision that would have killed most people on the spot. But Elvis had built up such a tolerance to these medications that even a potentially lethal dose couldn't knock him out. His body was rejecting the very drugs he depended on to survive. Think about what was going through Elvis's mind at this moment. He had a tour starting, fans waiting, obligations to fulfill, but his body was telling him something completely different. Every breath was a struggle. Every heartbeat was irregular, and no amount of medication could give him the peace he needed. At 9:30 a.m., Elvis made the decision that would define his final moments. He got up, grabbed that book about Jesus and the Shroud of Turin, and headed to the bathroom, the same ritual he'd performed hundreds of times before. But this time, when Ginger called out her warning about not falling asleep, Elvis's response carried a weight that neither of them fully understood. "I won't," he said, but those words weren't a promise. They were a goodbye. Elvis settled into that bathroom, opened his book about resurrection and the afterlife, and began what he somehow knew would be his final reading session. For approximately 4 hours, Elvis sat alone with his thoughts, his fears, and his desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, there was something waiting for him on the other side. The cruel irony is devastating. Elvis spent his final conscious moments reading about Jesus rising from the dead while his own body was shutting down. He was studying the face of Christ while his own face was about to be discovered lifeless on the bathroom floor. What happened in those 4 hours? Did Elvis feel his heart starting to fail? Did he realize that the drugs had finally won? Did he have time to think about his daughter, his legacy, the millions of fans who would mourn him? Or did he simply slip away peacefully, finally finding the sleep that had eluded him for so long? When Ginger found him around 1:30 p.m., Elvis was cold to the touch. She slapped him, turned his head, and thought she heard him breathe once, but it was too late. The king of rock and roll had lost his final battle, not on stage or in the spotlight, but alone in a bathroom, clutching a book about eternal life. The paramedics tried to revive him. The hospital tried to revive him, but Elvis Presley was officially pronounced dead at 3:30 p.m. on August 16, 1977, though he had probably died hours earlier, sometime during those quiet morning hours when he was reading about resurrection. The devastating truth is that Elvis had been preparing for this moment for months. The spiritual searching, the multiple baptisms, the desperate phone calls to the president, these weren't the actions of a man planning for the future. These were the actions of a man who knew his time was running out. Elvis chose to spend his final hours reading about Jesus conquering death, but he couldn't conquer his own mortality. He died trying to find peace in sleep, the very thing that had tortured him for years. And in the end, the man who had made the world dance and sing died in absolute silence. The signs were all there. The spiritual obsession, the physical breakdown, the final desperate words. Elvis Presley didn't just die on August 16, 1977. He had been dying for months. And somewhere in his heart, he knew it was coming. The evidence is overwhelming. Elvis knew his fate was sealed. What do you think? Did the king of rock and roll have a premonition about his death? Or was it just tragic coincidence? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking celebrity revelations.
And I said that Kiss and Tell books, I have another name for people who write those kind of books, and they're pimps and whores. because they can't write their own name to earn a living properly. They got to lean on somebody else. And they know nothing about...
It's 1960, and Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board himself, is about to discover that Elvis Presley, the man he publicly called a cretinous goon, has been sleeping with his fiancée behind his back. This isn't just some Hollywood gossip. This is the moment that would define one of music history's most explosive feuds. Frank Sinatra thought he had it all figured out. He was the king of cool, the voice that made Bobby Soxers swoon, the man who could make or break careers with a single phone call. But there was one problem he couldn't solve. Elvis Presley was stealing everything from him. His charts, his audience, his relevance. And now, as he was about to find out, Elvis was about to steal something far more personal. The woman at the center of this storm was Juliet Prowse, a stunning South African dancer who had captured Sinatra's heart during the filming of Can Can. She wasn't just another Hollywood starlet. She was the woman Frank Sinatra wanted to marry, the one he paraded around Vegas, the one he sang to during his television specials. To Sinatra, Prowse represented everything he stood for: class, sophistication, old-school glamour. But Elvis Presley had just returned from Germany after his military service, and he was hungry, not just for a comeback, but for everything the establishment had denied him. He'd been tamed by the army, his rebellious edge dulled by 2 years of following orders. Now he was back, and he was ready to reclaim his throne, no matter who got hurt in the process. When Prowse signed on to star opposite Elvis in GI Blues, Sinatra should have seen it coming, should have known that putting his fiancée in a movie with the most sexually magnetic performer of the generation was playing with fire. But Frank was arrogant. He believed his world was untouchable, that his woman was untouchable. He was dead wrong. The moment Elvis laid eyes on Juliet Prowse on that Hollywood soundstage, the game changed. Here was Sinatra's prized possession, this exotic beauty who represented everything the old guard held dear. And Elvis, with that predatory charm that had made him a star, saw an opportunity for the ultimate revenge. You have to understand, this wasn't just about attraction. This was about power. Elvis had been dismissed, mocked, called names by Sinatra and his crowd. They'd treated rock and roll like it was a disease, and Elvis like he was nothing more than a hillbilly with a guitar. But now, Elvis had something Sinatra wanted: youth, relevance, and the ability to make women lose their minds. The affair began almost immediately. While Sinatra was performing in Vegas, believing his woman was safely working on a movie set, Elvis was seducing her in his hotel room. The irony was crushing. The man Sinatra had called a degenerate was proving just how degenerate he could be, right under Frank's nose. But here's what makes this betrayal even more devastating. Juliet Prowse didn't just sleep with Elvis and keep quiet about it. She told Sinatra. She looked the most powerful man in entertainment in the eye and confessed that she'd been having an affair with his biggest rival. Can you imagine that conversation? The moment when Frank Sinatra, a man who commanded respect from presidents and mob bosses alike, realized he'd been played by a 25-year-old from Mississippi. The humiliation was complete. Elvis hadn't just stolen Sinatra's thunder in the music world. He'd stolen his woman, his dignity, his sense of control. Everything Sinatra had built his identity around was crumbling, and Elvis Presley was the wrecking ball. This wasn't just a celebrity scandal. This was a declaration of war between two men who represented different Americas, the sophisticated past and the rebellious future. And Elvis had just fired the first shot in the most personal way possible. The question wasn't whether Sinatra would retaliate. The question was how far he'd go to destroy the man who'd humiliated him so completely. The moment Elvis Presley walked onto the GI Blues set in April 1960, Juliet Prowse knew she was in trouble. Fresh from 2 years of military discipline in Germany, Elvis had returned to Hollywood with something to prove. He'd left behind his teenage girlfriend Priscilla Presley in Germany. He was still officially dating starlet Anita Wood, but none of that mattered when he saw Sinatra's woman. Prowse later admitted the attraction was instant and overwhelming. "We had a sexual attraction like two healthy young people," she confessed years later. But this wasn't just any attraction. This was the king of rock and roll setting his sights on the chairman of the board's most prized possession. Elvis was strategic about it. He couldn't be seen publicly with Sinatra's fiancée. That would have destroyed both their careers and probably gotten him killed. So he did what he did best. He seduced her in secret. Hotel room meetings became their routine. While America watched Elvis play the clean-cut soldier boy in GI Blues, behind closed doors he was anything but innocent. The affair was passionate and reckless. Prowse was playing the role of Lily, a club dancer who falls for Elvis's character. The irony was perfect. She was literally being paid to fall in love with Elvis on screen while actually falling for him off screen. The chemistry between them was so electric that everyone on set could feel it. But nobody dared to say anything. But here's where it gets really twisted. Juliette Prowse wasn't just cheating on Frank Sinatra. She was doing it with full knowledge of what it would mean. She knew Elvis was Sinatra's biggest rival, knew about the hatred between them, knew that Frank had publicly humiliated Elvis by calling him a cretinous goon, and she chose Elvis anyway. The hotel room meetings became more frequent, more brazen. Elvis would have his people arrange for Prowse to slip away from the set, away from the studio handlers, away from anyone who might report back to Sinatra. They'd meet in Elvis's suite, and for those stolen hours, she got to experience what it was like to be desired by the most magnetic performer of the generation. Meanwhile, Sinatra was completely oblivious. He was busy with his own career, his own projects, confident that his woman was safely working on a movie set. He even bragged to friends about how Prowse was expanding her acting career, how proud he was of her success. The man who prided himself on knowing everything that happened in Hollywood was being played by his own fiancée. But Elvis wasn't content with just the physical affair. He wanted to possess her completely, to prove that he could take anything he wanted from anyone, even Frank Sinatra. He would tell Prowse things about Sinatra, about the old guard, about how the world was changing and she could be part of that change. He was seducing her mind as much as her body. The most shocking part? Prowse was falling for it. Here was this sophisticated woman who'd been with one of the most powerful men in entertainment, and she was being swept off her feet by a rock and roll rebel who represented everything her world stood against. The danger, the secrecy, the sheer audacity of it all. It was intoxicating. Then came the moment that changed everything. Prowse made a decision that would rock Hollywood to its core. She decided to tell Sinatra about the affair. Not quietly, not privately, but in a way that would become public knowledge. She looked Frank Sinatra in the eye and confessed that she'd been sleeping with Elvis Presley. Her reasoning was almost insulting in its casualness. "Frank and I are mature people," she said publicly. "We don't go for this teenage bit about going steady and all that jazz." She was 24 years old, treating the most powerful man in entertainment like he was some jealous teenager who couldn't handle the truth. But Frank Sinatra wasn't some teenager. He was a man who'd built his empire on respect, loyalty, and the understanding that certain lines could never be crossed. Elvis Presley had just crossed the biggest line of all, and Juliette Prowse had not only let it happen, she'd thrown it in Frank's face. The affair was over, but the war was just beginning. The phone call came in late 1960, and it was the last thing Elvis Presley expected to hear. Frank Sinatra, the man whose fiancée Elvis had been sleeping with for months, was inviting him to appear on his television special. not as a gesture of friendship, but as a cold, calculated business move that would force both men to perform the greatest acting job of their careers. Sinatra was trapped, and he knew it. Elvis's affair with Juliette Prowse had humiliated him personally, but professionally, he couldn't ignore the reality. Elvis was dominating the charts, and Sinatra's television special needed ratings. His managers, his network executives, everyone was telling him the same thing. If he wanted to stay relevant, he needed Elvis Presley. So Frank Sinatra swallowed his pride and made the call. But this wasn't forgiveness. This was warfare, disguised as entertainment. The build-up to the show was excruciating for both men. Elvis knew he was walking into enemy territory. Sinatra's world of tuxedos, sophistication, and old-school class was everything Elvis had rebelled against. But he also knew this was his chance to prove he belonged in that world, to show that the hillbilly from Mississippi could play by the establishment's rules. The irony was brutal. Elvis had to get dressed up in Sinatra's world, literally. Gone were the leather jackets and rebellious style. Instead, Elvis appeared in a formal black evening suit, looking like he was attending his own funeral. The costume was symbolic. Elvis was entering Sinatra's domain, playing by Frank's rules, all while knowing that Frank knew exactly what he'd done with his woman. But Sinatra's revenge was more subtle and more devastating. He forced Elvis to tone down everything that made him dangerous. No hip gyrations, no rebellious energy, no sexual magnetism. Elvis had to perform like a neutered version of himself, all while Sinatra watched from the wings, knowing he'd successfully domesticated the man who'd humiliated him. The show itself was a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. Both men smiled for the cameras, exchanged pleasantries, even performed each other's songs. But anyone who knew the real story could see the tension crackling between them. When Sinatra attempted to dance with Elvis, it wasn't friendship. It was a power move. A way of showing America that he could make the king of rock and roll dance to his tune. Elvis played his part perfectly, but the cost was enormous. His female fans in the audience were screaming for him, but he could only give them shoulder hunches and restrained movements. The man who'd revolutionized performance was being forced to perform like a trained seal, all because he'd crossed Frank Sinatra. The most twisted part was how both men had to pretend the affair never mattered. During interviews, they spoke about mutual respect and bridging generational gaps. Sinatra even made jokes about Elvis losing his sideburns in the army, as if they were old friends ribbing each other. But underneath the jokes was the unspoken truth. Frank was reminding Elvis that he'd been stripped of more than just his hair during those 2 years away. Behind the scenes, the hatred was palpable. Sinatra's people and Elvis's people barely spoke to each other. There were separate dressing rooms, separate entrances, separate everything. The two camps moved around each other like hostile armies forced into an uneasy ceasefire. But here's what made it even more surreal. Juliette Prowse was there too. She appeared on the same show, performing as one of Sinatra's backing singers. So all three players in this twisted drama were on the same stage pretending everything was normal. Elvis had to watch Sinatra sing directly to the woman he'd been sleeping with, while Sinatra had to watch Elvis perform in front of the woman who'd betrayed him. The show was a massive success, breaking ratings records and proving that the combination of Sinatra's class and Elvis's popularity was television gold. But the success came at a price neither man was willing to acknowledge publicly. They'd both sold pieces of their souls for the sake of their careers. Elvis left that soundstage knowing he'd proven he could play in Sinatra's world, but also knowing he'd been diminished by the experience. Sinatra had gotten his revenge by forcing Elvis to become everything he'd once rebelled against: controlled, sanitized, safe. And Sinatra? He'd gotten his ratings and his revenge, but he'd also revealed something about himself that he probably wished he hadn't. The man who prided himself on being above petty jealousy had just orchestrated an elaborate public humiliation of his romantic rival. The show was over, but the war between Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley was far from finished. Both men would carry the scars of this encounter for the rest of their lives, and their paths would cross again in ways that would surprise everyone. By the late 1960s, something nobody expected had happened. Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley had become unlikely allies. The feud that started with betrayal and humiliation had evolved into something far more complex, a mutual understanding between two men who discovered they were more alike than different. Las Vegas changed everything. Both men found themselves headlining the same city, performing for the same audiences, dealing with the same pressures. The town that had once been Sinatra's exclusive kingdom now belonged to both of them. Elvis's residency at the International Hotel was breaking records, while Sinatra continued his legendary runs at the Sands and later Caesar's Palace. The hatred didn't disappear overnight, but it transformed into something else: respect. They were both prisoners of their own fame, both struggling with the weight of being icons. Sinatra watched Elvis battle his demons and saw a reflection of his own struggles. Elvis looked at Sinatra and saw a man who'd survived decades at the top, who'd found a way to endure when lesser men would have crumbled. Their friendship developed through mutual friend Tom Jones, who was also performing in Vegas. The three of them would meet for drinks, share stories, and slowly the old wounds began to heal. But Elvis was spiraling, and everyone who cared about him could see it. The prescription drugs had taken hold. Elvis, once the picture of youthful rebellion, was becoming a shadow of himself. His performances were still electrifying, but those closest to him knew he was dying slowly, publicly, tragically. The man who'd once stolen Sinatra's woman was now stealing glances at death every night. Sinatra, despite everything that had happened between them, couldn't watch it happen. The man who'd once called Elvis a cretinous goon was now genuinely worried about him. Maybe it was guilt over their past. Maybe it was recognition of their shared humanity. But Frank Sinatra decided he had to do something. August 1975. Elvis was hospitalized in Memphis with liver problems, his body finally rebelling against years of abuse. His inner circle was panicking, his fans were praying, and the entire world was watching to see if the king would survive. That's when Frank Sinatra made the most important phone call of his life. According to journalist Chris Hitchens, who heard the story directly from Sinatra, Frank called Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis. When the switchboard operator asked who was calling, Sinatra identified himself, fully expecting to be dismissed as a prank caller. Instead, within seconds, Elvis Presley himself was on the line. The conversation that followed was one of the most emotionally charged moments in music history. Sinatra, the man who'd been betrayed and humiliated by Elvis 15 years earlier, was now pleading with him to save his own life. "I told him he needed to take care of himself and stop playing around," Sinatra later recalled. "I told him he was too young to die." Think about that moment. Here was Frank Sinatra, a man who'd built his reputation on being untouchable, unbreakable, emotionally invulnerable, begging Elvis Presley to choose life over death. The feud that had started with stolen love had evolved into something far more profound: genuine human concern. Elvis listened, maybe even promised to try harder, but the damage was already too severe. The man who'd once been unstoppable was now trapped in a cycle of self-destruction that no phone call could break. 2 years later, on August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found dead at Graceland. He was 42 years old, the same age as James Dean would have been, gone too soon, like so many other icons of his generation. The official cause was heart failure, but everyone knew the real killer was the prescription drugs that had promised to ease his pain, but instead had destroyed him. When news of Elvis's death reached Sinatra, the old crooner was devastated. Whatever anger he'd once felt about Juliet Prowse, whatever humiliation he'd suffered, none of it mattered anymore. All that remained was the grief of a man who'd tried to save someone he'd come to care about and failed. The story of Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley isn't just about celebrity feuds or romantic betrayals. It's about how hatred can transform into understanding, how enemies can become allies, and how sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who understand us best. The twisted relationship between these two legends proves that Hollywood's biggest feuds often hide the most human stories. If you want to discover more shocking secrets about music's greatest rivalries, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't believe what happened between Johnny Cash.
Well, I think for her it was this place where she could be like wild and free, and I think her father allowed her to kind of like run the show there.
Right.
So I think that I think some of her most joyful memories were at Graceland.
Riley Keough thought she was grieving her mother. Instead, she found herself fighting her own grandmother in court over Elvis Presley's most precious possession. And what Priscilla Presley tried to do behind Riley's back will absolutely shock you. Lisa Marie Presley dies unexpectedly in January 2023, leaving behind a devastated family and a multi-million-dollar estate. But before the tears even dried, a legal bombshell exploded that nobody saw coming. Priscilla Presley, the woman who helped build the Elvis empire, was now challenging her own granddaughter's right to inherit it. We're talking about Graceland here, people, the holy grail of rock and roll. The mansion where Elvis lived, where he's buried, where millions of fans pilgrimage every single year. And Priscilla was essentially saying that Riley, Lisa Marie's own daughter, shouldn't be the one controlling it. But here's what makes this story so twisted. Lisa Marie had specifically chosen Riley as the sole trustee of her estate. Not Priscilla. Not anyone else. Riley. Her own daughter. The woman who knew her best, who understood her wishes, who had been by her side through everything. And yet, Priscilla decided to challenge this decision in court. Think about the audacity of that move for a second. Your daughter dies, leaving behind clear instructions about who should handle her affairs, and you decide to override those wishes? That's not just family drama. That's a declaration of war. Riley herself described the aftermath of her mother's death as complete chaos. She said everyone was in a panic, trying to understand how to move forward, and in the middle of all that grief and confusion, Priscilla drops this legal challenge like a nuclear bomb on the family. Now, you might be thinking, maybe there was a good reason. Maybe Riley wasn't qualified. Maybe there were concerns about her ability to handle such a massive responsibility. But that's not what happened here. Lisa Marie knew exactly what she was doing when she chose Riley. She wanted someone who would protect not just the business, but the legacy. Someone who understood what Elvis meant to the family and to the world. The stakes couldn't have been higher. We're not just talking about money, although there's plenty of that involved. We're talking about the future of the Presley name, the preservation of Elvis's memory, and the control of one of the most famous homes in America. Graceland isn't just a mansion, it's a cultural landmark. It's where Elvis's story lives and breathes every single day. But Priscilla's legal challenge threatened all of that. By questioning Riley's appointment, she was essentially questioning Lisa Marie's judgment, her final wishes, and her right to decide who would carry on the family legacy. And the timing? Absolutely brutal. Riley was still processing the loss of her mother, and now she had to gear up for a legal battle with her own grandmother. The family business side of the Presley empire is massive. Riley explained that there are huge business aspects that needed immediate attention, and they needed clarity on how to handle everything in the wake of Lisa Marie's death. But instead of unity during this tragic time, they got courtroom drama and public speculation about family rifts. And here's what really gets me. This wasn't just about who would make business decisions. This was about who would have the power to shape Elvis's legacy for generations to come. Who would decide how Graceland operates, how the Elvis brand is managed, and how the family's story is told to the world. Riley found herself in an impossible position. She was grieving, she was trying to honor her mother's wishes, and she was fighting for her right to protect the legacy that meant everything to her family. All while her own grandmother was challenging her every step of the way. The question everyone was asking was simple. What could possibly drive Priscilla to make such a move? What was really behind this shocking power grab that threatened to tear the Presley family apart forever? To understand why this legal battle was so devastating, you need to know the truth about Lisa Marie's final days and the absolute chaos her death created behind the scenes. And Riley's insider account of what really happened will break your heart. Lisa Marie Presley died at just 54 years old from complications following bariatric surgery. A bowel obstruction that should have been manageable became fatal. And just like that, Elvis's only child was gone. But here's what Riley revealed that nobody knew. Lisa Marie had always sensed her time was limited. She told Riley she always knew she wouldn't be here too long. It's like she had a premonition about her own death. The moment Lisa Marie passed, the Presley family machine ground to a halt. Riley described it as complete chaos, saying everyone was in a panic to understand how they could possibly move forward. Think about it. The only direct link to Elvis Presley was suddenly gone, and nobody knew what came next. But this wasn't just about grief. This was about business. Massive, complicated, multi-million-dollar business. Riley explained that there's a huge business side to their family that most people never see. We're talking about licensing deals, merchandise, Graceland operations, Elvis intellectual property rights, and ongoing revenue streams that generate millions every single year. When Lisa Marie died, all of that needed immediate attention. Contracts needed to be honored, decisions needed to be made, and someone needed to step up and take control. But who? And more importantly, who had the legal authority to make those decisions? This is where Lisa Marie's foresight becomes so crucial. She had specifically structured her estate to name Riley as the sole trustee. Not co-trustee with Priscilla, not a board of trustees, just Riley. That means Riley would have complete control over every aspect of the business, every decision about Graceland, and every choice about how Elvis's legacy would be managed going forward. Riley admits she was overwhelmed. She said it took time to understand all the details of the situation because it was so incredibly complicated. You're talking about a young woman who just lost her mother, suddenly being handed the keys to one of the most valuable entertainment estates in history. But here's what makes Lisa Marie's choice so brilliant. She didn't just pick Riley because she was family. She picked her because Riley understood the weight of the responsibility. Lisa Marie knew that preserving Elvis's legacy wasn't just about making money. It was about protecting something sacred. And she trusted Riley to make the right decisions. The court documents would later confirm that Lisa Marie clearly wanted Riley to take over the estate and all business aspects. This wasn't some last-minute decision or a document that could be questioned. This was a deliberate, thoughtful choice made by a woman who understood exactly what she was doing. But Priscilla saw it differently, and that's where everything went sideways. Instead of supporting Riley during this impossible time, instead of helping her navigate the overwhelming responsibility, Priscilla decided to challenge the very foundation of Lisa Marie's final wishes. The family that should have been coming together in grief was instead preparing for legal warfare. And the empire that Elvis built, that Lisa Marie protected, was now hanging in the balance, while lawyers prepared their arguments. What happened next would determine not just who controlled Graceland, but who would have the power to shape the Presley legacy for generations to come. The courtroom showdown between Riley Keough and Priscilla Presley wasn't just about money or control. It was about something far more personal and devastating. And what came out during those legal proceedings will change everything you thought you knew about this family. Priscilla's legal challenge wasn't some casual disagreement. She was formally contesting the authenticity and validity of Riley's appointment as sole trustee. Think about what that means. She was essentially claiming that Lisa Marie's final wishes were either fake or legally invalid. That's not just questioning a business decision, that's questioning her own daughter's mental state and judgment in her final days. The legal documents painted a picture of a family in complete turmoil. Priscilla's lawyers argued that Riley shouldn't have sole control over such a massive estate. They questioned whether a young actress had the business experience to handle the complexities of the Elvis empire. They suggested that Priscilla, as Elvis's former wife and the mother of Lisa Marie, should have more say in how the legacy was managed. But here's where it gets really ugly. This wasn't just about business control. Priscilla had her own personal agenda buried in these legal filings. She wanted to ensure her own burial spot next to Elvis at Graceland. Can you imagine the audacity? In the middle of challenging her granddaughter's inheritance, she was also making sure she got her preferred gravesite. TMZ reported that Priscilla had specifically requested to be buried next to her late ex-husband. We're talking about a woman who divorced Elvis decades ago, who had moved on with her life, but who still wanted to spend eternity next to the king of rock and roll. And she was willing to drag her own family through legal hell to guarantee that spot. The media had a field day with this story. Headlines screamed about family rifts, about greed tearing apart the Presley dynasty, about grandmother versus granddaughter in a battle for Elvis's crown. The speculation was brutal and relentless. Every entertainment news outlet was running stories about how the family was destroying itself from the inside. Riley was getting hit from all sides. She was dealing with lawyers, court dates, media scrutiny, and public speculation about her family's most private moments, all while still grieving her mother and trying to figure out how to honor Lisa Marie's wishes. The pressure must have been absolutely crushing. But here's what most people didn't understand. Riley wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for her mother's legacy and her children's future. When she said that Graceland is absolutely 100% mine, always has been mine, always will be mine, and when it's no longer mine, it will be my children's, she was making a statement about generational responsibility. The legal battle revealed just how high the stakes really were. We're not just talking about a house, even a famous house. We're talking about the control of Elvis Presley Enterprises, the licensing of his name and image, the management of Graceland as a tourist destination, and the preservation of countless artifacts and memories that define American music history. Lisa Marie had sold off most of the Elvis estate back in 2004, but she kept the family home. That decision now looked incredibly prescient. Graceland wasn't just a business asset, it was the heart of the Elvis story. And Lisa Marie had specifically chosen Riley to be its guardian. The court proceedings dragged on for months. Every legal filing was scrutinized by the media. Every court appearance was analyzed for signs of family tension. The Presley name, which had always been associated with music and entertainment, was now synonymous with family dysfunction and legal warfare. But Riley never wavered. She consistently maintained that she was simply trying to honor her mother's wishes. She wasn't power-hungry or greedy. She was a daughter trying to do right by her mom's memory and her family's legacy. The court documents would later confirm that Lisa Marie had clearly wanted Riley to take over the estate and all business aspects. The turning point came when the court had to decide what Lisa Marie would have wanted, and the evidence was overwhelming. The legal documents were clear, the witnesses were consistent, and Riley's appointment as sole trustee was validated. Priscilla's challenge was ultimately unsuccessful. Riley won the legal battle, but at what cost? The family had been through months of public scrutiny, legal expenses, and emotional turmoil. The media had painted them as a dysfunctional dynasty more interested in money than in honoring Elvis's memory. When Riley finally spoke to Vanity Fair about the outcome, she said that clarity had been achieved. But she also revealed something that would completely change the narrative about this entire legal battle. She said that things with her grandma will be happy, that they've never not been happy, and that anything suggesting otherwise in the press made her sad. Wait, what? After all this courtroom drama, after all the media speculation about family rifts, Riley was saying that she and Priscilla had never actually been unhappy with each other. That changes everything about how we understand this story. The legal documents now state that Riley will, to the extent of her authority, allow Priscilla to be buried in the meditation garden at Graceland. Priscilla's burial location will be at the location closest to Elvis without moving any existing grave sites. In other words, Riley gave her grandmother exactly what she wanted. But if Riley was always willing to accommodate Priscilla's wishes, what was this legal battle really about? The real story behind Priscilla's legal challenge will completely flip everything you thought you knew about this family drama, and Riley's mature perspective on what really happened reveals a truth that the media completely missed. Here's what actually happened. Priscilla wasn't trying to steal Riley's inheritance or destroy the family. She was trying to protect it, and Riley, with the wisdom and maturity that clearly runs in this family, understood that from the very beginning.
Riley explained it perfectly when she said that all Priscilla wants is to love and protect Graceland and the Presley family and the legacy. That's her whole life. Think about what that means. Priscilla has spent decades of her life devoted to preserving Elvis's memory and managing his legacy. This wasn't about greed or power. This was about a woman who couldn't bear the thought of that legacy being mishandled. When Lisa Marie died suddenly, Priscilla panicked, not because she wanted to control the money, but because she was terrified that everything she and Elvis had built might be lost. She saw a young woman, her granddaughter, being handed this enormous responsibility, and she questioned whether Riley was ready for it. But here's what makes this story so beautiful. Riley completely understood where Priscilla was coming from. She never saw her grandmother as the enemy. She saw her as someone who loved Elvis and Lisa Marie so much that she couldn't help but worry about the future. Riley said it herself. Living under the light of someone as big as Elvis is a big responsibility. It's huge. And Priscilla knew that better than anyone. She had lived with that pressure for years when she was married to Elvis. She understood how overwhelming it could be, how easy it would be to make mistakes that could damage the legacy forever. The legal challenge wasn't really about questioning Riley's qualifications. It was about making sure that every possible safeguard was in place. It was about ensuring that the transition from Lisa Marie to Riley was handled with the care and attention that the Elvis legacy deserved. And the media, they completely missed the point. They turned this into a story about family greed and dysfunction when it was actually about family love and protection. They created a narrative of grandmother versus granddaughter when the reality was two women who both loved Elvis trying to figure out the best way to honor his memory. Riley's response to all the media speculation was perfect. She said she doesn't understand what all the drama in the press was about. When asked about Priscilla being buried at Graceland, she said, "I don't know why she wouldn't be buried at Graceland if she wants to be, of course." That's not the response of someone who's been fighting a bitter legal battle with her grandmother. That's the response of someone who understands that family is more important than legal technicalities. The truth is, Priscilla's legal challenge actually helped Riley in the long run. It forced the court to examine Lisa Marie's wishes carefully and confirmed that Riley was indeed the right choice. It gave Riley the legal validation she needed to move forward with confidence, and it ensured that every aspect of the estate transition was handled properly.
Now Riley owns Graceland, just as her mother wanted. She controls the Elvis legacy, just as Lisa Marie intended, and she's doing it with her grandmother's support and blessing. The legal battle that looked like it was tearing the family apart actually brought them closer together. Riley says that sharing Graceland with the world was Priscilla's idea from the start. That tells you everything you need to know about Priscilla's motivations. She's not trying to hoard Elvis's legacy for herself. She wants to share it with the world, to make sure that Elvis's story continues to inspire people for generations to come. The Presley family is now stronger than ever.
Riley has the legal authority she needs to protect the legacy. Priscilla has the assurance that Elvis's memory is in good hands, and the world gets to continue experiencing the magic of Graceland and everything it represents. Elvis is buried in the meditation garden at Graceland, between his grandmother and his father. His mother is there too, along with Lisa Marie and her son Benjamin, who died by suicide in 2020. Soon, Priscilla will join them. It's a family reunion that spans generations, all united in their love for the king of rock and roll. Riley understands that she's not just managing a business or maintaining a tourist attraction. She's preserving a piece of American history. She's protecting something sacred, and she's doing it with the love and support of her family, including the grandmother who challenged her not out of spite, but out of love. The legal battle that looked like it might destroy the Presley family actually proved how strong they really are. When it mattered most, love won over legal technicalities. Family loyalty triumphed over media speculation, and the Elvis legacy remains safe in the hands of people who truly understand what it means. That's the real story of Riley Q's fight to save Graceland. It was never really a fight at all. It was a family figuring out how to honor their greatest treasure while protecting it for future generations. If this family drama shocked you, smash that like button and subscribe for more celebrity family secrets. Have you ever had to fight family members over an inheritance? Drop your stories in the comments below. And don't miss our next video exposing another Hollywood family's hidden battles.
Well, Elvis, just got out of the Army, and he was driving down Ventura Freeway, and he heard Guitar Man off my album.
This is the incredible, true story of how a relatively unknown Nashville guitarist named Jerry Reed walked into an Elvis Presley recording session and, with just one song, managed to do something that seemed impossible in 1967. He showed the king of rock and roll how his own comeback should sound. What happened in that studio would not only revive Elvis's career, but also launched Jerry Reed from obscurity to country music stardom. All because sometimes the student becomes the teacher, even when the student wrote the lesson plan. Elvis Presley, the man who changed music forever, is sitting in his Graceland mansion in 1967, and he's absolutely miserable. The king of rock and roll has become a prisoner of his own success, churning out one terrible movie after another. We're talking about films so bad that Elvis himself said, "The only thing worse than watching a bad movie is starring in one." Think about that for a second. This is the guy who gave us Hound Dog, Jailhouse Rock, and All Shook Up. The man who made teenage girls scream and parents clutch their pearls. And now he's trapped, making movies with titles like Clambake and Speedway that nobody wanted to see. Elvis knew his artistic soul was dying. Every single day in Hollywood was another nail in the coffin of his musical legacy. While the Beatles were revolutionizing music, while Bob Dylan was changing the world with his lyrics, Elvis Presley was stuck on movie sets pretending to be a race car driver or a charter boat captain. The frustration was eating him alive. He'd lie awake at night wondering if he'd ever make real music again, if he'd ever feel that electric connection with an audience, if he'd ever prove he was still the king. Because let's be honest, by 1967, a lot of people were writing Elvis off. The critics were saying he was washed up. The kids were listening to other artists. His career was in free fall, and everyone knew it. But then something happened that would change everything. Elvis was driving around Los Angeles, probably feeling sorry for himself, when a song came on the radio that stopped him cold. It was called Guitar Man, and it had this incredible groove, this rhythm that was pure Elvis territory. The song had everything he'd been missing, that raw, authentic sound that made him fall in love with music in the first place. This wasn't just another tune, this was his lifeline, his ticket back to relevance, his chance to prove to the world that Elvis Presley wasn't done yet.
The song was written and recorded by a guy named Jerry Reed, a relatively unknown musician grinding it out in Nashville. Jerry Reed was one of those incredibly talented artists who seemed destined to remain in the shadows. A brilliant guitarist, a clever songwriter, and a charismatic performer who just couldn't catch a break. His version of Guitar Man had barely made a dent anywhere. It peaked at number 53 and disappeared faster than you could blink. For Jerry, it was just another song that didn't quite connect with audiences, another reminder of how tough it was to make it in the music business. But Elvis heard something in that song that nobody else did. He heard his comeback. So Elvis makes a decision that would either save his career or destroy it completely. He's going to Nashville to record Guitar Man. He's putting together the best session musicians money can buy. Harold Bradley, Chip Young, Charlie McCoy, Floyd Kramer, Buddy Harman, Bob Moore. These weren't just good musicians, these were legends. The Nashville A-Team. Guys who could make any song sound incredible. Elvis walks into RCA Studios with absolute confidence. He's got the perfect song, the perfect musicians, and the perfect plan. This is going to be his triumphant return to real music. This is the moment he proves he's still the king. But then something unprecedented happens, something that nobody in that room saw coming. These legendary musicians, guys who've recorded thousands of songs between them, can't get it right. For hours, they're trying to capture that Jerry Reed magic, and it's just not working. The rhythm isn't locking in. The groove that made Elvis fall in love with the song is nowhere to be found. Elvis is getting frustrated. His producer is getting nervous. The musicians are getting embarrassed. This was supposed to be easy. This was supposed to be his comeback. Instead, it's turning into a disaster. And that's when someone in the room says the words that would change everything. Why don't you just go get that Jerry Reed guy and have him play it? It was such a simple idea, but it set off a chain reaction that nobody could have predicted. Because Jerry Reed wasn't sitting by his phone waiting for his big break. He was out on the Cumberland River, fishing, completely unaware that the king of rock and roll was about to change his life forever. The question is, would this scruffy, unprepared fisherman save Elvis's career, or would he destroy it completely? So they finally tracked down Jerry Reed, and this is where the story gets absolutely wild. Picture the most pristine recording studio you can imagine, RCA Studios in Nashville, where music history gets made. Elvis Presley is there in his perfect...
This man looks like he just crawled out of a swamp. We're talking muddy fishing boots, clothes that haven't seen a washing machine in days, unshaven, smelling like river water and fish bait. Every single head in that room turns, and you can practically hear the collective gasp. This is not what anyone expected the savior of Elvis's recording session to look like. But here's where Jerry Reed proves that appearances mean absolutely nothing. The second he walks into that room, he lights it up with this incredible energy that's impossible to ignore. Elvis immediately connects with him. You can feel the chemistry between them from across the room. Despite looking like a wild man, Jerry has this infectious personality that just draws people in. Now, Jerry hadn't touched a guitar in days. He'd been completely relaxed, fishing all weekend, not thinking about music at all. And suddenly he's supposed to perform for the king of rock and roll, while every legendary musician in Nashville watches him like hawks, probably thinking, who is this guy and what makes him so special? Then Jerry Reed does something that blows everyone's minds. He sits down with his gut string guitar, not the fancy electric guitars these session guys are used to. and starts tuning it in ways that make absolutely no sense to anyone watching. These are seasoned professionals who think they know everything about guitar playing, and they're watching Jerry take the B string and tune it up a whole tone. Then he takes the low E string and tunes it down. The room goes dead silent. Everyone's thinking the same thing. What the hell is this guy doing? See, Jerry Reed didn't play guitar like anyone else in that room. While these Nashville cats were straight country pickers using picks and playing conventional tunings, Jerry had developed this completely unorthodox style that looked impossible. He played with his fingers, used these weird tunings that nobody understood, and had techniques that seemed to defy the laws of physics. So Jerry starts playing, and here's the thing, he was rusty as hell. He hadn't played in days and it showed. He's hitting clunkers, missing notes, struggling to get back into the groove. Any other producer might have sent him packing right there. Any other star might have said, "Get this amateur out of here." But Elvis heard something completely different. Every time Jerry hit a wrong note or stumbled, Elvis got more excited. He was hearing the raw, authentic feel that his polished session musicians couldn't capture, no matter how hard they tried. This wasn't perfect. It was real. And that's exactly what Elvis had been searching for. "That's it," Elvis kept saying. "That's the sound."
Jerry's getting frustrated with himself, though. He knows he's not playing his best, and he's embarrassed. Finally, he stops playing and looks up at Elvis, who's been watching him intently this whole time. And Jerry, being Jerry, breaks the tension in the most unexpected way possible. He pauses, looks directly at Elvis, and says, "God, you're handsome." Elvis bursts out laughing. The whole room cracks up. The ice is completely broken, and suddenly everyone's relaxed and having fun. That's when the real magic starts happening. Jerry explains to Elvis that what he's trying to play is actually two guitar parts layered together. If he plays one part now and overdubs the other later, they'll have the full sound. Elvis immediately gets it. This is why his session guys couldn't nail it. They were trying to play two parts at once. So they start working through it, take by take. Jerry's nerves settle down. His playing gets tighter. Elvis starts feeding off Jerry's energy, and with each take, Elvis's vocals get stronger, more confident. Jerry's feeding off Elvis's enthusiasm, and Elvis is feeding off Jerry's authenticity. The whole room transforms. These legendary musicians who'd been struggling all day suddenly find their groove. The rhythm section locks in. The song comes alive. You can feel the electricity in the air. By the 12th take, they had it. Pure gold. Elvis was sky high. The musicians were thrilled. Producer Felton Jarvis knew they just captured something special. But as Jerry Reed packed up his guitar and headed for the door, nobody realized they were about to face the biggest challenge of all. Jerry Reed is walking toward the door, probably thinking this is the best day of his career. He just nailed a recording session with Elvis Presley, made friends with the king himself, and helped create what everyone in that room knows is going to be a massive hit. Life is good. Then, the business guys step in. "Hold on there, Jerry, we need to talk about some paperwork." Now, Jerry had no idea what was coming. This was his first real brush with the big leagues, and he was about to get a crash course in how the music industry really worked. See, Colonel Tom Parker had a rule that wasn't written down anywhere, wasn't advertised, but everyone in Nashville knew it like gospel. If Elvis Presley was going to record your song, you had to sign away half of your publishing rights. Not negotiate, not discuss. You signed, or Elvis didn't record your song. And here's the twisted genius of Parker's system. It was actually a pretty good deal for most songwriters. If Elvis recorded your song, especially if it became a single, you were going to make serious money. Life-changing money. The kind of money that could set you up for decades. So most writers, even the successful ones, gritted their teeth and signed the papers. The business guys start explaining this to Jerry like they're doing him the favor of a lifetime. "Look, this is just how it works. Elvis records your song, it becomes a hit. You make a fortune. All you have to do is sign away half your publishing." Jerry Reed stops dead in his tracks.
What did you just say? Half your publishing. That's the deal. That's how it works with Elvis. Now, Jerry Reed was many things. A fisherman, a guitar player, a songwriter, a guy with a great sense of humor. But he was also a poker player, and poker players know how to read a room. They know when they're holding a winning hand, and they know when to push all their chips into the center of the table. Jerry looks around that studio. He sees Elvis over there, still buzzing from the session, still sky high from finally getting his song recorded the way he wanted it. He sees the musicians packing up, all of them knowing they just captured something special. He sees producer Felton Jarvis, probably already thinking about how this song is going to restart Elvis's recording career. And Jerry Reed realizes something that nobody else in that room has figured out yet. He's got all the power here. "Let me understand this," Jerry says, his voice getting a little harder. "You want me to sign away half my publishing for a song that Elvis has been trying to record all day without success? A song that your entire A-team of musicians couldn't get right? A song that only worked when I walked in here and played it myself?" The business guys start getting uncomfortable. This isn't how these conversations usually go, but Jerry's just getting started. Look over there at Elvis. Look at how happy he is. Look at how excited he is about this recording. You really want to walk over there and explain to the king of rock and roll why his comeback single isn't going to be released? The room goes dead silent. Everyone's watching this scruffy fisherman from the Cumberland River stare down Colonel Tom Parker's entire operation. Because that's what's going to happen if I don't sign these papers, right? You're going to tell Elvis that his perfect recording session means nothing because Jerry Reed wouldn't play ball with your publishing deal? Jerry Reed had read the room perfectly. He knew Elvis loved the song, he knew the recording was incredible, and he knew that Elvis had final say over what got released, not Colonel Parker's business machine. The genius of Jerry's move wasn't just that he refused to sign, it was how he framed the refusal. He wasn't being difficult, he wasn't being greedy, he was protecting Elvis from his own business team's greed. "I'll tell you what," Jerry says, and you can hear the poker player in his voice. "You go ahead and explain to Elvis why this song isn't coming out. That's your business, but I'm not signing that paper." The business guys are scrambling now. They've never been in this position before. Usually, artists are so desperate for their shot with Elvis that they'd sign away their firstborn child. But Jerry Reed isn't desperate. He's confident. He knows exactly what he's worth in this moment. "You think Elvis is going to be happy when you tell him his comeback single is dead because you couldn't close a publishing deal?" And with that, Jerry Reed walked out of RCA Studios, leaving behind the most powerful machine in the music industry, completely stunned. The king of rock and roll had just met the one man who wouldn't bow to his empire. Jerry Reed's victory wasn't just about one song or one recording session. What happened in that RCA studio represented something much bigger. The moment when an artist finally said enough to a system that had been exploiting creative people for decades. Because here's what happened after Jerry walked out. Elvis Presley looked at his business team and said, "We're releasing that song." Not, "Let's negotiate with Jerry Reed." Not, "Let's find another song." He said, "We're releasing it, and we're releasing it exactly as we recorded it." Colonel Tom Parker, the man who had controlled every aspect of Elvis's career, who had built an empire on taking half of everything, had just been beaten by a fisherman from Nashville, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. Think about the audacity of that moment. Jerry Reed had just stared down the most powerful manager in music history and won. This wasn't David versus Goliath. This was a nobody from the Cumberland River versus a multi-million-dollar empire, and the nobody walked away with everything. Guitar Man was released in 1968, and it became exactly what everyone in that room knew it would be: a massive hit.
It reached #1 on the country charts and cracked the top 50 on the pop charts. More importantly, it became the launching pad for Elvis's comeback. This was the song that proved Elvis could still make real music, that he wasn't just a movie star playing dress-up. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. This was right before the famous '68 comeback special, and Guitar Man helped set the stage for Elvis's return to live performance. Jerry Reed's stubborn refusal to give up his publishing rights had literally helped save Elvis's career, but the impact went far beyond just Elvis and Jerry. Word travels fast in Nashville, and soon every songwriter in town knew the story. Jerry Reed had done something that was supposedly impossible. He'd beaten Colonel Tom Parker at his own game. He'd proven that artists didn't have to accept exploitation as the price of success. This is why Jerry Reed's story is so important. In an industry built on taking advantage of creative people, Jerry Reed showed that sometimes, if you're smart enough and brave enough, you can win. He understood something that most artists never figure out. Your leverage isn't just your talent. It's understanding when you're irreplaceable. Jerry Reed wasn't a huge star. He wasn't a household name. He was a working musician who'd barely had a hit. But in that moment, in that studio, he was the only person in the world who could give Elvis what he needed. And Jerry was smart enough to recognize that power and strong enough to use it. The friendship between Elvis and Jerry continued long after that recording session. Elvis genuinely respected Jerry, not just as a musician, but as a man who wouldn't be pushed around. They recorded together several more times, and Elvis always made sure Jerry was treated with respect. There were no more publishing demands, no more strong-arm tactics. Jerry Reed went on to have an incredible career. Hit songs, movie roles, and a reputation as one of the most innovative guitar players in music history. But people who knew him said he was most proud of that moment when he stood up to the music industry machine and won. Here's the thing about artistic integrity. It's not just about making good music. It's about maintaining control over your own creativity. Jerry Reed understood that giving up half his publishing wasn't just about money. It was about maintaining ownership of his art, his ideas, his creative expression. The music industry is built on the assumption that artists are desperate, that they'll take any deal just for a chance at success. Jerry Reed proved that assumption wrong. He showed that sometimes the best business decision is to walk away from a bad deal, even when it looks like the opportunity of a lifetime. Jerry Reed didn't just save Elvis's career that day. He reminded everyone in that industry that real artists can't be bought, can't be intimidated, and won't be pushed around. That scruffy fisherman from the Cumberland River had done something music industry executives thought was impossible. He'd beaten the system, kept his integrity, and helped create a masterpiece in the process. What do you think? Would you have signed those papers or walked away like Jerry did? This story proves that sometimes the biggest risk is standing up for what you believe in. Hit that subscribe button for more untold stories where underdogs beat the system.